Anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to Special Conversations. I'm Laura Sims, and I am so thrilled to be here with these three fantastic novelists. I loved all of these novels so much, so I'm so happy to have the three of them together. They're very different novels, but do have some complementary features and overlaps that should make for good conversation. Since we have three people, I'm going to go ahead and get through the bios. So Boo Trundle, right here, is the author of the novel The Daughter's Ship, and I have them all out on the table there. Called A Wholly Original and Unforgettable Debut by novelist Julia Phillips. Boo is a writer, artist, and performer whose work has appeared across various platforms and publications, including the Brooklyn Rail, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and NPR's The Moth. She has released 3 albums of original music with Big Deal Records, and she lives in Maplewood. We have 2 Maplewood writers and 1 Montclair. Eliza Minot on the end. Eliza Minot's latest novel, In the Orchard, was called Compassionate and Lyrical and Wonderfully Attuned to the Body and Its Sensations by the New York Times. Her books have been named to various best of lists, including the New York Times Notables list, and her work has appeared in magazines and anthologies. She received her MFA from Rutgers Newark, where she was a presidential fellow in 2017, and has taught at Rutgers Newark, Barnard College, and NYU. She's received a New Jersey State Artist Fellowship and the Maplewood Library Literary Award. She grew up the youngest of 7 children in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts, and lives in Maplewood with her family. Alice Elliott Dark's latest novel is the national bestseller, Fellowship Point, called Compassionately Complex and Rooted in Loyalty to Humanness by the Boston Globe. She's also the author of Think of England, a novel, and 2 collections of short stories. Her work has appeared in, among others, The New Yorker, Harper's, Plowshares, and Best American Short Stories, and has been translated into many languages. In the Gloaming, a Story was chosen by John Updike for inclusion in the Best American Short Stories of the Century, and was made into film, that century, big deal, and was made into films by HBO and Trinity Playhouse. She's a recipient of a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and an associate professor at Rutgers Newark in the English department and the MFA program. So please join me in welcoming these 3. So I was going to have each of you read a short excerpt from your books. Alice, do you want to start since you're next to me?
I'm just going to read right from the beginning.
Okay.
Very brief. Agnes, Philadelphia, March 2000. Such a perfect day for writing, gray and quiet. But nothing came to her. Not a sentence, not a phrase, not a word worth keeping. Her wastebasket was full. Her pile of index cards was robust. Graph paper covered with diagrams was neatly pinned to a sheet of felt on the wall, but the spot where her stack of usable pages usually accumulated was an empty nest. This had never happened to her before. Agnes Lee had written 6 novels, dozens of books for children without hesitation, composing and rewriting and tossing, fearlessly killing her darlings, trusting many more would come along, not to mention volumes of journals and logs secreted in a captain's trunk in an attic room at Fellowship Point, and lots of articles and essays under various witty pseudonyms. She might rewrite an entire manuscript, but she'd never before been at a loss at this juncture, after her research had produced new material and the time had come to sit down and draft the book. The words had always arrived. Her writing was on tap. All she had to do was pull down on the handle and out it flowed. That fact was at the center of her self-conception. She wrote. If she couldn't, if the tap was dry, then what?
blue, yes,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay. Well, I'm gonna, it's kind of like a poker game. I'm gonna read my first page and Alice read her first. I'm gonna match her. See you in upper. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Truett. Oh, okay, so yeah, so just quickly, this book, part of the book is set in the submarine where these three sort of fantasy characters are trapped, and they are representative of the little children inside the main character that are sort of trapped in their subconscious. So I'm just going to read the first one, the first page. His name's Truett. I want to introduce you to my girls. We all live together in a U-boat. Why are we trapped in a German submarine? Because my dad, Craig, is a World War II buff. We grew up browsing his bookshelves in Virginia Beach. It's a naval town, home to aircraft carriers and battleships. Fighter jets rip the sky above the dunes. Somewhere underwater and not too deep is our submarine. A ghost ship, a wreck, a childhood. Ping! That's the sound of the echo sonar searching for a target. I may not be the smartest kid in the submarine, but I'm the loudest and the strongest, and it's up to me to decide what's true. The others have their own idea of true. Smushed-Bug, Star, they have their stories. Smushed-Bug says, there's no such thing as true. I know it's true, I tell her. I know it happened. True to you, she says, is not the same as true. I'll give you a tour of the undersea boat, and that's the last German word I'll use. Undersea boat. You know the shape, a cigar. I'll start up front. Power torpedo room and crew quarters, bunk bed soldered into the hull, officers' quarters, galley kitchen, radio closet, control room. Keep coming, follow me through. Here's the engine room, and then at the very back, another torpedo room. 220 feet, bow to stern. We're starting this very claustrophobic. Everyone lives on top of each other. There's pressure on every inch of the boat from all that water. Ping!
Thank you.
Okay. I could read the bit, well, I'm not gonna read the beginning.
Can you intro your book?
I
a little
will. So this is it's not even a full day. We're covering sort of 12 hours from sort of maybe 2 a.m. till 2 in the afternoon. A new mother with a fourth little infant wakes up in the middle of the night and is nursing and thinking and like that for half the book, which makes it sound like really boring. It's not. There's thoughts about the past, thoughts about other people, conversations, you know, it's sort of, that's what's happening while the nursing's going on. Then in the second half, the little family goes to an apple orchard. So they're in the orchard, but they're also, you know, this woman is in the orchard of child rearing. So the part I'm gonna read, she's at the orchard. Her name is Maisie, the young mom, and the baby is a little too young to be out of the house, which is kind of an important aspect. She only had the baby 2 weeks before, so it's early for everybody to be moving about an orchard. But anyway, this part, Maisie is just watching a grandfather struggle with a granddaughter who doesn't want to put her shoe on. So it's basically just watching people on a hay bale that she's sitting near. Okay. So, it's a lot easier when they're your grandkids, he says. That's the grandfather to Maisie. He's saying it's a lot easier when they're, you know, like, because he's struggling with the baby. It's a lot easier when they're your grandkids, he says, and not your kids. Maisie nods. I bet. Though the idea is as abstract as becoming a mother was abstract before it happened. She didn't know anything about it. She didn't know who these people, her children, were. She didn't even know what sort of a person she would become, and how could she have? How can anyone have any real idea of what will happen next? She doesn't know who she will be. She doesn't know that the decades, by the time she is a grandmother, if she is ever a grandmother, will have merged together like an accordion, and that they will expand like an accordion as well, with varied memories plaintively drawing out of the melancholic chords of merged time, the merged styles of the times, music of the times, and trends in clothing and colors and fads, all background to her own strangely particular moments. She does not know that she will grow wiser only by learning not to hide from pain and difficulty and learning how to sit back and listen. She doesn't know that even a decade later, she will still feel her milk drop when she thinks of her infants, when she hears a hungry baby cry. She does know one thing, though, that she didn't used to know, that the special, close attention that she is learning to pay toward her children is actually toward her own heart and her own universe. She is learning that the closer she gets to their small smells, their little humor and mischief and verve, the closer she is getting to an unfound mystery, hitting it from time to time like a vein of gold, a trickle-thin branch of a mother lode, vibrant and dazzling in dark rock.
Thank you all so much. And Alice, could you just preview your book a little bit since
I did,
it's
yeah. It's a long book about.
It goes by very quickly. You
It
don't
does
want
go
it to
by.
end.
It is kind
You
of
don't
a
want
page
it to
turner,
end.
but it's about two 80-year-old women and one 26-year-old woman who have various relations with each other and affect each other over the course of the book. The two 80-year-old women are trying to solve the problem of what to do with a family piece of land that both of them have inherited from generations of ancestors, and the complicated sort of inheritance scheme, which I won't describe, but it's gotten to the point where it could end up out of the hands of the people who've had it and into the hands of a developer. So that's sort of the pressure on the situation.
Mhm. Great, thank you. And Boo, did you want to say anything else introductory?
Sure. Yeah, like I said, there's two threads in the book. There's the everyday life of a woman in her 40s, and she's unraveling a bit. She's having mental health adventures, and and a lot of her psychic pain is caused by her inability to face things that happened to her when she was a kid, and the things that she hasn't faced are sort of represented by these three children that are trapped on the submarine. And so as she's going about her life, the submarine's sort of rising in the water, and then there's, sort of like, once it hits the surface, there's bombs, and, so the submarine is representative of what she won't and can't face, and the question is, will she face it in time to sort of save herself and her marriage?
Great. It's intense, very raw,
Yeah.
very moving, yeah. So Eliza, I'll start with you and ask you why this particular story, and where did it come from?
Well, I was living in Maplewood, raising 4 kids for the last 20 years, so that's where it came from. But I mean, I did set out to write a book initially. It was a kind of, I don't even know what the story was going to be, but it was different. It had to do with the housing crisis, young families, dealing with that, and finances, and even maybe sibling families. It was sort of a more sprawling idea of a family, not saga, but many different characters. The more I wrote, or the more I thought about it, and when I did sit down to write, the more it was sort of one mom, with some anxiety about money too, definitely in the background. But since I had been so kind of thick in that material, really, and also felt like I needed, well, many ways, but how can I frame this best? I guess the more I found myself writing about it, the more I felt like, I wanted to remember things about my own life, and I realized a lot of my own writing is kind of not necessarily remembering my life, but trying to remember feelings that will be gone, or, trying to capture time and capture life, which will not be the same. So I wanted to do that, and I also felt like it was not something I'd read a lot in detail. I mean, little pieces I would, or poems, or there would be mother, children, like I certainly have read about that. I don't mean it was like this, crazy idea, but this kind of slowed down focus. I just thought, I'm gonna lean into it.
Like the intent focus on breastfeeding.
Yes.
So incredible, like I have never read that. in literature before, you know?
Thank you.
And I loved it because that's can be such an important piece of the motherhood experience, and you don't see it. It's like we put the shawls on and it's shameful, and I know
Yes.
it's changed and it's gotten different,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I think
still.
it has, but
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for saying so, and noticing or thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, my editor at one point said, maybe there's too much breastfeeding. I mean, there was a lot, there was more when before it was trimmed down a little bit, because it was like,
Too
okay,
much
more,
nursing.
more, yeah.
That's so funny.
But,
Yeah.
yes, and I guess I was starting, the more I wrote, the more I was thinking of things that a man couldn't write.
Right. Yeah. Great. And Boo, what about you? Why the story? Where did it come from?
Well,
Or where did it start?
well, this is my debut novel, but I've been writing novels since I was 20, 18. And this was actually a reworking of a novel I wrote in my 20s, which I tried to get published in the 90s. And I've had people say, well, the parts in the 90s seem really realistic. I'm like, yeah, well, that's because I actually wrote them in the 1990s. So, yeah, they're pretty realistic. It's just one small part of the book, but that's what I started with was, and then, you know, it's a fairly autobiographical book. And so when I was taking a lot of memoir workshops, but I was writing fiction. And so I was using sort of memoir tricks to access memories and just periods of my life. And then there were also some of the tricks were like, you know, there's a whole thing about the bathroom in the house where I grew up, so we would draw maps, all these kind of tricks you use to make yourself really vividly remember things of your memoirs. But I was writing fiction, but they kind of just merged. And so even though there's a lot of made up stuff, there's also a lot of memoir. And I guess, you know, it's just where I was in my life. You know, it was reflective of what I was going through. So.
Yeah.
Wrote about a divorce, then got one, you know, and I was before I got divorced, and I'm sure if my ex-husband had read the drafts, he'd have been like, this is a little alarming, you know, but I was way before the divorce, so I was writing about the lawyer's office, and then I go back and look at it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, so. Mental health adventures, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And Alice, do you want to talk about?
This book was really a surprise to me. I started with a character who didn't turn out to be a major character. For anyone who's read it, it was the character of Virgil. And I just kind of followed from one step to the next. He ended up going into this little island in the middle of the ocean in Maine, and then I got him off the island, and he ended up over at a place that turned out to be Fellowship Point, and then there was a woman there that turned out to be one of the other. You know, it just sort of built and built. And I had all the characters, and then I needed a plot. I didn't have a plot. And I just so happened to visit a friend in California who did a lot of work, has done a lot of work in land trusts, and she said, just kind of offhand, it's amazing how much land is given to the University of California, that's where she was working at that time, by women. You know, women inherit the old rancheros of California, and rather than selling them to developers, they give them to land trust or to. And so I started really researching women and land ownership, which is, if anyone wants to write a nonfiction book, it's there to be written because it's kind of an untold story. And I thought, this is what I want, because I wanted to write something like a 19th century book, but with a modern plot. And women landowners was a modern plot because women didn't own land in this way in the 19th century. So then it all came together, but it took a few years.
Right.
A few, are you being
Yeah.
sarcastic, like how many?
No, it took, from the time I started it until I figured out the plot was probably 3 years.
Okay.
Okay. And then you kind of
Then I
started,
fixed-
followed that.
Yeah, then I figured out the book after that.
And the two women became the focus, right?
They really did, just sort of by default. I have it reflected to me all the time that it's a novel about their friendship, but that, to me, that was just so obvious. I mean, I've always had really close friends with women, so I didn't really think I'm writing about women's friendship. It wasn't like a theme, it just was natural. to me.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that about motherhood too. It's kind of the same thing. Like in the description, it said friendship, motherhood, and like motherhood is just something that sort of becomes such a big part of your life that it's like always happening, but it's not something that you're not specifically writing about, except
Right.
that you're a mother. So you know,
Yeah,
so it's,
right.
Yeah.
it's kind of like being a friend.
That you
in a
start
friendship.
Yeah.
Seems like an obvious thing, an obvious relationship, but then when it becomes a book and someone reads it, then that's
Yeah, well, I
that's the
see it
structure.
differently.
Right.
Like with your book, Liza, I think like one of the things that's so really gripping about it in this moment is that it's so positive about, you know, being overwhelmed by small children. And we read so much negative writing about that experience now. And you know, you took the different approach. I mean, not that it's not realistic, it's realistic, but it's basically Maisie is really loving being with these small people.
It's joyful, like, and joy is complicated, but yeah, it does. That's what I was struck by that too, just that like positive slant on motherhood.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get the other slant. You know, I mean, we all, right? It's like anything that's terrifying and isolating is gonna make one resentful and angry, mostly.
Right.
But there is, within all that, at least in my experience, there is such, I don't know, I guess joy is a good word. But everything's joy, you know, but really joy is
Not
like,
really, yeah.
It's like satisfaction. It's so satisfying.
or
Yes.
joy like that intense vulnerability, kind of,
Yeah.
right? Like that's
I think-
terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you're creating life. It's like totally mind-blowing. I mean, I found it to be one of the trippiest, probably the trippiest thing. Yeah, I can say it. The trippiest thing. I mean, far more trippy than losing people
Yeah.
to death,
Yeah.
I think.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think of that, it's not really a parenting book, but it's about parenthood, all joy and no fun.
Yeah,
And I'm blanking on her name.
Jennifer Senior.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And that book was so beautiful, and she really clarifies, like, joy, you know, comes out of things that are difficult and intense, and, you know, we always put this, like, emphasis on happiness in our culture,
right.
but joy is different,
Yeah.
and joy is complicated. But, so I was thinking of that joy when I was reading your
Thank you.
So, you all have these complicated, fascinating women characters, and I was wondering if there are influences that you can point to, like literary influences or...
Did you ever see A Woman Under the Influence by John Cassavetes?
No.
Yes.
The,
I never saw it.
That comes to mind
General.
for me. Well,
Yeah.
just like, I mean, it's a film, it's an old movie, but the woman is just, you know, definitely like
it's
on
Jenna
the edge,
Rollins.
Jenna Rollins,
yeah.
yeah, on the edge of, you know, between, and she has little kids in the movie, but she's just on the edge between sanity and insanity
Yeah.
and walking that fine line.
She cheers for the bus on the city street coming. Like, they're coming, kids! You know, it's like she's like,
Maybe a
coming
little
home from the school
further
bus.
on the edge, over the edge. Maybe she's over the
She
edge.
starts to lose it a little.
Yeah.
And she goes like this at the dinner table. You know, like,
For me, but like also just any interior, anything
Yeah.
written about an interior experience, like, you know,
Yeah.
Virginia Woolf or, you know, where the interior, but for me, I had the interior world come external, where it was actually a submarine that had its own plot line, you
Yeah.
know, so, but it is about the internal experience, which is similar to what you're writing about with your character. She's having a very interior experience as she's breastfeeding
Yeah.
in the orchard.
which I guess when I was, I guess I didn't read a lot in the sort of decade that, I mean, when I went to school, Alice actually taught me.
It wasn't that long ago.
No. I mean, I went and got my master's.
I wouldn't say I taught you, but she was in my class.
You did. But I went and got my master's after writing 2 books, and then, you know, my kids were a little bit bigger. It was great, but it was sort of when I began to read again in a different way. Like before that, I would sort of, I don't know, I just didn't read, really. except nursing, actually, like Maisie does reading. I do remember reading nursing, because you're nursing so much, and we didn't have phones yet.
Yes.
We did.
So it was just like, no, I didn't get a phone till I was 40.
Oh. Some people think had phones.
I mean, I had a flip phone or, you
Yeah.
know, but like iPhone, it just wasn't the same.
Right.
TV.
What was I saying? Oh, reading?
Influence.
Oh, influences.
Yeah.
So, always when, I mean, I'm thinking of the books that I loved even as a, or like at Rutgers, I remember reading Mrs. Bridge, that kind of blew my mind. There's not a lot that goes on, but it's
Yeah.
more of like how people are living and what life is like that I like reading. I like a plot, sure, but I don't find that as fascinating as, like Alice's book, the plot is great, but if there wasn't a plot, I wouldn't have cared.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like everything else she's doing that I like reading. Yeah.
It helps though.
Yeah, it
Plot
helps,
always
I get it, that's what a novel is. But then even when I'm thinking, when I was writing this book, it's like a man makes plots. I mean, not like I'm being anti, but you know what I mean? It's like, I'm gonna go, what would a woman who's nursing, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not really answering your question, but I do remember reading like Rachel Cusk, like Outline, like those are plot-ish, but more it's just
Yeah.
almost she's disappeared, but just watching, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Plot can
Or
be
Jenny
so many.
Offal, the Department of Speculation. There's stuff that happens, but
Right.
it's more about like moments.
Right.
And
I thought of Catherine Mansfield when I
I
was
love
reading your
her.
book.
Thank
The
you.
garden party, like, oh my gosh, the stories.
I love those too.
Yeah.
Bliss,
Yes.
I mean, she's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
There you
She
go.
has really good, very
Full
good
circle.
thoughts,
And Alice, who were some of your influences?
Well, I mean, at a certain point, I read very deep into particular authors. Like, I tried to read everything of a few people.
Yeah.
So those people, one of them was Edith Wharton, Jane Bowles, Scott Fitzgerald, I can't think of who else, but Flannery O'Connor was one. This was a long time ago. It was when I was, in my early 30s. And so all of them influenced me deeply. But that was, I wasn't thinking of anything in particular when I was writing this book, but I know the things I learned from studying all of them. And it was actually a great exercise, because if you read everything by someone who's considered to be a great author, you see that they wrote a lot of not great stuff.
Right.
And at school you never see that.
Right.
So you feel like the great writers are so much better than anything you could ever be. But when you see that, like Scott Fitzgerald has, like he has a book of like 200 something stories, and none of which are great. They're all him though. They're all like, if you like him, and I do, but they're not great. And that was just really, that was so reassuring to me as a young writer. Like, oh, I might get there someday.
Right. That's great. So, Boo, I wanted to ask you, so you're facing this really traumatic material in the book, and you do it in this really formally inventive way. Like, we've all read about characters facing and trying to overcome trauma, but you've done it in this really cool, unique, formal way, and I was wondering how you came to that, and why that form for this novel.
Well, I sort of coined a term for it. I call it a process novel, because I was going through all these different processes while I was writing it, and including therapy. So like one of the things when I was in therapy, I was doing inner child work, which is sort of reparenting. You go in and you find the little child inside of you. Like, I think everybody has wounds from childhood, varying degrees. I mean, we don't have to call it trauma, but just any experience as a child where something's unresolved. And so you go in and you sort of reparent that child and give to that child whatever that child didn't receive. You can do it for yourself. I mean, symbolically or metaphorically. And I was doing that, and there's a certain kind of work called internal family systems where you find multiple children or multiple parts, and they're not all children. Some are teenagers, some are even adults, but just parts of yourself that you kind of communicate directly from your higher self. Like you find sort of the senior, you try to find like the senior self that's actually, you know, calming and nurturing and not freaking out all the time. You know, that's the self that you use to, you know, relate and sort of get the little parts to relate. And so it was something I was doing in therapy, like an inner bully, for example. I think we all have like that little bully that's just like, you're a loser. You know, why didn't you get up on time? You know, why did you eat that muffin? You know, or whatever, that little inner bully, that little part. So you would try to get that little bully to sort of chill and maybe not beat up so much on the other little children in the system. It's a system. So that's like that's just one example. So I was using that process in therapy, and then I just started writing about it, and those parts became the characters in the book. So Star, Smushbug, and Truett, the 3 kids on the submarine, are my parts, basically. So that's what I mean. So there's definitely, Truett was not, his name was Scout, and also I think it's interesting, it's a boy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a part of me, but it was always a boy, never anything but a boy. So there's that too, just sort of gender fluid parts. There's girls, there's boys. I think we all have all of it. And so they became characters in the book, and they, you know, they have their own story, and they all have their own story. They all have their own version of what happened. Right. That's sort of one example. So that's how, as far as structure goes, it took a lot of, it was a big puzzle and a lot of shuffling around of note cards, and I redid it many, many times trying to find a structure that would work start to finish, beginning, middle, end. I think I did it, but yeah, it's very, you know, sort of one of a kind, which is like a challenge for marketing. You know, it's just kind of, it's kind of a unicorn.
Which is good.
It's good, but it's also, you know, harder to describe and sort of market.
I think as soon as you get into it, you get it.
If you let go, you kind of have to let go. You know, I'm not supposed to read my reviews, but I did read like one of my Amazon reviews, and the person said, you know, once he let go and just let it be what it was great.
That's great.
So, but that is a turning. You have to kind of be like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm just going to go with it, and then it makes sense.
Yeah. Don't read.
So I've been told by Amazon.
Do you read your Amazon reviews or Goodreads reviews?
I know, it's a
My
terrible
editor
thing to
said
do.
don't, and so I said,
So you
okay,
did.
I think you probably know what you're talking about.
Yep, that's
So,
good.
no, I
It's
don't.
nice to have somebody tell you.
Yeah.
This is the way I'm going to
Just
do it, and somebody
obey.
could tell me,
I
but
know.
self-restraint is not
I
my.
mean, that doesn't usually work on me either, but in this case,
Yeah.
I decided I would stick to that. Maybe someday I would.
Don't do it.
Eliza, do you read yours? Goodreads or Amazon reviews?
I have, I guess, but I don't go seek it out. It's like sort of,
Yeah.
you know. So, yeah, I've seen what some people have said.
Yeah.
And honestly, anything anyone says, I can agree with. You know what I mean?
And
Either way.
Yeah.
It's like,
And you
it's-
can
it's
just be
not for you.
happy that they read it. Right?
Yeah,
They're
Too.
reading it.
Or if they
discussing
don't,
it.
you know, it's,
Well, like any,
books aren't for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
the same book.
No, it's.
No.
that's so true. Yeah.
It's very true, yeah. So Boo talked a bit about her process. Can you talk about like your process with writing this novel? You did a little bit, but,
Well,
or like your
process
habits?
is a really strong word for it. It was kind of messy. I really did like just let myself mess around for a few years. Just writing each character, you know, all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's so much just on pieces of paper in my computer about these characters. And then I guess when I started to really decide, okay, I'm gonna pull this thing together, and I did want a strong plot for it. I
Yeah.
wanted to really learn how to do a real plot with subplots that affected the main, you know, I wanted to do all that, because I
You did it,
never
Alice,
really
you
did.
did.
Yeah. Well, I never had really done that before, like in that way.
It's hard.
And I just thought it'd be really fun to learn that, because I admire it so much when I read these 19th century novels, and, you know, it just like, they're so complicated and interesting.
Did you write an outline? Did you do an outline?
No, I really didn't. I mean, I I don't know how I did it. I mean, I honestly, I have trouble remembering, but I do know that well, I shouldn't say I didn't write an outline, because I would get a certain far in, and then I would just write down, this is what I know happened. And then, but I wouldn't really refer to it again. It was just sort of like setting it in my brain. But every single day, and I always do this, I write, what is this about? And then I answer it. And it takes me years to get to the final one, like, oh, okay, this is, but answering it every single day is really, that kind of keeps me organized. I can't even explain why.
Is that called the through line? Would you say isn't that what they call the through line in a novel?
Well, it could be, but I think it's more like, what is this about, like, for me? Like, what am I,
What are you doing?
What am I mining here?
Yeah.
Outside of, inside of, in my, deep subconscious or unconscious, like, what am I unearthing that's gonna turn into, like, looking like a story and a plot? So it's more like that, but, yeah.
And
So
would you have different answers every day?
every day, different answer.
Just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
But,
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's hard to remember exactly. I wish
I
I
feel
could
like
do
it's
an
like
outline.
childbirth. I cannot remember how I wrote this latest
Right.
novel.
Yeah.
And I feel like because it's so hard to do it, it's kind of like childbirth, like you
block it out, or
Yeah,
you
you
never do
block
it
it
again.
out,
Yeah.
so that you'll do it again. Yeah.
Do you have the
That's what you'll
feeling
do it
sort of
again.
like,
Exactly.
here's the book, and it's like, wow, that made sense? Or like it actually,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like that when I look at mine, I'm like, who wrote
Who
that?
wrote that?
Yeah,
Me
it's
too, I
very
guess.
shocking.
I like it, yeah.
And Eliza, what was your process, or is your process?
I just follow my nose. you know.
Yeah. Like follow the characters, kind of,
Yes.
the character.
And then I guess a lot of sort of, cutting and pasting of like literally and also like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm. Right. Great. Well,
Have you ever read a book on it outlining, like on a plot book about how to plot? You were talking about
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
yeah, do you have any that you recommend or?
Oh, are there any that I recommend on how to plot? Nothing's coming to mind. There's one called How to Write a Novel in 90 Days, which I actually think is kind of good.
I think I have that one, yeah. I've read a bunch of them, like, and I think screenplay books are also good. I mean, it's a different,
Screenplay books are good.
it's different, but it's similar enough. It's harder, I feel like screenplays are much more like puzzles, but, a little more unforgiving maybe than a
Yeah,
novel.
You can't be
Yeah.
in your head.
Yeah, it's
It
much
has to
more
be-
precisely timed to,
The Otessa
20 minutes.
Moshbag wrote one from the 90-day one.
Oh,
Oh,
she
that's
did?
what she wrote, Eileen.
Yes.
Oh, she used
Oh,
that
she
outline,
did.
that's
That,
right.
it's actually, that book actually has a lot of really wise.
It's more like a writing class with prompts.
Yeah,
kind of.
exactly.
It's like just
Exactly.
Huh.
prompt, and now
Yeah.
what is your character? It's like,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I want to open it up for questions, if anyone has any questions. I'm sure you do, yes?
I'd like to follow up on something that Lou said about marketing, because you may not remember, but you and I met ever so briefly actually after Laura's book launch, when you were with Marcia, and she said that you had just written a book, and I said, what's it about? And I don't remember what you said, but I remember what I took away from it, which was some kids trapped in a submarine. And
You mean we met outside in the park, right?
yes,
Yes, I do
that's
remember
right,
that,
yes. And so I was like, well, that sounds fascinating. And so I got the book and I read it, and it really shook me. I thought it was terrific. But at the same time, had you told me more of what it was about, I'm actually not sure I would have been willing to dive in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, for all of you, what are your challenges with marketing what you have written, and how do you know how best to appeal to an audience that you're looking for?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the things that I hadn't written a book in, I hadn't published a book in over 15 years. So partly it's social media, partly it's I'm older and kind of, I think I was more distracted with it. And again, there weren't phones to look at, it's like, look at review, like whatever, it just was different. And also to be aware of all the other books that are coming, it just was a different thing. So I'm not saying, I mean, I do have an answer about marketing that's coming, which is that there was an experience I had with this book which was like, not an identity crisis, but it was like, oh my God, I should have written a book that had a bigger plot. Oh, I should have written a book about, like, sort of, I should have. And then it's like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, like, excuse me, sorry. It's like, that's not, this is like, you know, this is the book I wrote. And I don't really, not I don't care if it doesn't sell, but I'm not a literary fiction writer to try to be a bestseller anyway. Do you know what I mean?
But you do want to sell.
You do, and you want to make a living.
But
But
you have to
you
sell,
can't really
because
think,
otherwise
you
don't
do,
get to
otherwise
do
you
it
never
again.
get
I
a
know.
contract again.
Right.
But if my editor is happy, I'm happy,
Yeah.
sort of is my feeling. Like, she's my kind of highest bar of person I want to impress with my writing, and also if she wants to sell it too. You know, it's like, yeah, but it's, I don't know. But if one it's like when you start comparing yourself to anything, to other people, to other houses, to other cars, to other, I mean, that's simplistic, but do you know what I mean? It gets you nowhere. But then again, if you're like, you know what, I want to write a blockbuster that has a smoking plot that's gonna, you know.
But I
like,
don't know if anyone can do that.
I don't
It's
either.
really hard
I
to
feel
do
like
it.
you
yeah.
have to
Set
write
out to
from
do it.
Yeah.
Well, let me
Or
jump
it's-
in
yeah.
because I feel like
Yes.
I was the
You
queen
started
of
this.
like mismarketing.
started
Like
this.
tell you it's about one thing and not about another, and then you were like, what the hell
But
is
it
this?
worked.
She read it.
Yeah, she read it, but like, you know, I know what you mean. Like, if I had had more time, I would have told you about the dark stuff. But actually, right now, like, I'm working with like a podcast agent. It's not part of my publishing company. It's something I hired her separately, and so I have 3 decks. So I've been doing it all week. So it's like on my mind, really on my mind, trying to pitch it to people that would have it on a podcast. I have 3 decks. I have one for literary audience, writers, people who are craft oriented, people who are literary fiction, read hard books, like challenging fiction, and want to talk about the nitty gritty of that. Second one is general readership, who are, they're not writers and they're not like, they don't specifically are interested in literature, but want to read a good book that's just going to entertain them. And then the third is recovery, like healing, recovery, life coaching, you know, like, which is a huge market. And I was really digging into that this week, looking at it. But then I'm having to like say, well, okay, this is kind of a hard book for you because it's a literary fiction, so it's not just like a self-help book, you know, so it's, you know, but I think that it's just like honing, and marketing is an art. I mean, and unfortunately, publishing companies don't have, if you're not one of their big marquee clients, they don't have the support to give you the publicity and the marketing sort of attention they used to, so you kind of have to learn how to do it yourself. And if you like doing it, great, and if you don't like doing it, too bad, and you do it. Like, or, you know, I mean, that's my experience. Like, I keep saying, like, I can't do this anymore. You know, I just want to write my book, I don't want to do marketing. But then I remember, like, all the years I spent writing the book, I want people to read it,
Yeah.
so.
You want to take care of it.
How about you?
I'm not talking tonight.
She's the moderator. It's like in the presidential debate.
Oh, gosh. But yeah, marketing is very weird and tricky. And, you know, they use, like, the publishing industry uses genre as a way of, like, you know, organizing readers and writers into little boxes, and they don't always fit, but it can get you readers, so I don't know.
Yeah.
See, I'm not ready to talk tonight. Any other questions?
Mine is more of a comment. I read Fellowship Point, and Agnes stayed with me for a really long time.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, she just was such a strong character, and just there were so many things about her that I admired, and, you know, her struggles, but yeah, I would kind of just be doing nothing and be thinking about Agnes, so thank you.
I'm glad.
Mhm.
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like being around, it's like, you know, you miss them when they're gone. It's
So
all-
that's a good
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
Just a comment too, but all three of you, your books are so different, and none of you sat down to write the book you ended up with, and yet you all ended up with something wonderful, as I understand. So,
Thanks.
congratulations.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's a
that's a
strange
lead-in
process.
to my
Chris.
question, because I'm
Yeah.
wondering how much influence does an editor have on the final book? Is there a lot of like rubber stamping, this is great, or do they really shape and influence what the final outcome is, do you think?
Mine doesn't change much. But
I had to rewrite, not rewrite, but revise mine before my editor bought it, so she looked at it and she told my agent she was interested, but there were some changes that she wanted to, like, she wasn't sure about the ending, and there was some stuff, there was this character called Dead Girl that was kind of not working, and then I had to change the name. The little bully's name originally was Scout, and I had to change it, so I had to come up with a new name, which ended up being Truett. That was hard, that was the hardest thing,
So
but.
you really invested in Scout?
It's hard to change a name at the end, but it was because my name is Boo, and then Scout is in To Kill a Mockingbird, that's To Kill a Mockingbird, and people were just getting distracted. Like, so I could see that. I mean, I couldn't argue against it, it was hard, it's really hard to change a name at the very end.
Yeah.
Especially because it was an actual part of mine, like that like I said, that I was sort of working with in therapy, and that was the book, he was like, yeah, that's not okay, you're not changing my name, like, but I did, so. Override.
You can say no to things, but you have to weigh your.
Yeah, you have.
Well, I'm talking about To My Little Part Scout, like I had to say
Oh,
no to
yes.
him,
Oh,
and he's the
yes,
bully,
yes.
you know.
Override. Right.
Override, yeah.
Override, yes.
Well, I had to cut 200 pages, so I did do that with my editor.
200 pages, was it
Yeah, it
like,
was 800. I mean, I knew I was gonna have to cut it, I knew.
you
it
did
was
have
longer
fun
than
with
that.
it, yeah, you
Yeah.
did have fun
That was
with
much
it.
longer than that.
Yeah.
That was nothing.
Wow. I remember
You
when
whittled
I
it
wrote,
down to
wrote
the
to
800.
you on Instagram telling you I loved the book, and you were like, and I said, oh, would you like Elizabeth Strout? Because I do think of Elizabeth Strout with your novel. Would you think of like keeping this universe going that you
Yeah.
created? And you said something like, there's a lot of
Yeah,
a lot of stories on the
It's
cutting
true.
floor,
Yeah,
a lot
there
of
are.
pages.
I got
you
the
could
sense,
pick up.
yeah, I was gonna ask you that when you were talking.
Mhm.
So, thank you ladies for doing this. I'm curious, you mentioned something that stuck with me when you talked about, you said, why don't write so that to have a bestseller, for instance, right?
I mean, yeah.
Well,
so-
You wouldn't turn it down.
Right,
okay.
no, but the question I have for you is, why do you write? For each of you, why do you write? Because I've learned watching, I have another friend who recently wrote a book, to be a bestseller, it's not just like, oh, everyone likes it, like, there's a whole machine
Yeah, yeah.
behind, like, the timing, and you have to get so many sold by a certain time and all that stuff. So, why do you write?
Good question. No, I mean, I don't mean no, because I do have an answer. Mostly it's just it's like a coping mechanism. I mean, I'll go years of not really, I mean, I'll write things down or write things on my phone or write the thing or, but I won't like be writing. But it's just how I think of, kind of like I was saying before, of how to trap. It's almost like taking photographs to me. It's not necessarily even experiences I'm having, but just ideas I have or things I hear and things I want to kind of, curate somehow. Do you know what I mean? It's just the way reading has taught me so much as a kid, all through my life. And I often am not aware of not of how I feel, like I know how I feel, but just things get distilled when I write them down, and it's like a way, I mean, I think it is for everybody's thinking, at least that's what I tell my composition students, that writing is thinking, but it's like, it's how I deal, kind of.
I'd love to hear from all of you. I'm willing to share. Why do you write?
Well, I think for me, it's echoing her, it's a coping mechanism for sure, always was. But also I think I'm just a creative person. I also paint, and I had a recording artist career in my 20s. I was a musician, and I'm an expressive, creative person. And so it's almost a compulsion to make something. In a way, it is also in a way of just dealing with time. not just capturing time, but passing time and coping with time, you know, and so, and then it's a practice, and the writing kind of begets more writing, and what I was thinking too of everyone tonight, you know, all three of us kind of said we just kept writing, and then also had a novel, you know, it's like partly just showing up at the page, like every day, and it becomes a practice, and it sounds like yours really sounds like a spiritual practice, where you say, what's this about today? Like that's a very, to me that sounds like a spiritual practice, and so it's spiritual for me, I would say.
I started as a child, so I think that is a different thing than people who start when they're adults. So it was an escape for me as a child. Like I needed a place to go because I had a very chaotic childhood.
Me too.
And writing, I could make a safe world on the page. And I still, I've come to terms with it. I still really want that for myself in writing. Fellowship Point was like a beautiful place with people I liked. And that was like it was a great place for me to go every day. But it is like all the things. It is like, I think of it as meditation. I think of it as a practice like some people run. It's a practice, and it's all kinds of things.
A habit, even.
Yeah, definitely that. Sometimes it's a little bit of a compulsion. It can take all kinds of forms, but it's definitely something that, as Eliza said, and Boo too, it's a way to organize my thoughts and make them legible even to myself. So it's not just like this mass of feelings. It's like how to shape them into something that will move me forward or be meaningful to someone else.
Great question. Thanks for asking that question. One last question?
I have a question
Yes.
about your book covers, because I'm kind of it seems to me that a lot of book covers look alike lately, like they're
Yeah.
all like the
Back of the
historical
head.
fiction with
Yeah.
a woman on the
With a
side
woman.
angle and like all of the graphic ones, and yours are all, I think, beautiful and look like they're very apropos for your books, but particularly yours, Boo, is very unique, and I'm wondering who designed it, or did you say this is what I want, or do they bring you 10 things and you say I like this one, or how does that process look for choosing a cover?
It's a funny story actually, because they said, could you send us a bunch of like photos and drawings that you think would sort of match the book cover? And I put it on a Pinterest board, and I drew this actually.
Did you?
Yeah, it was one of my
I was
drawings.
wondering that kind of in my.
And I didn't even have the original anymore, I don't know where it went, but I had the JPEG, so I just threw it on the Pinterest board, and then like 6 months later, I met the editor I hadn't even met her yet, I met her in a cafe, because it was kind of during COVID when this was happening. And she had it on her phone, she said, we'd love to show you the book cover, and I started crying, because it was I was like,
That is, I
she
could.
didn't tell me, she showed me the book cover, and I started crying.
Did she
I was
know
like,
it was yours? Did
yeah,
she?
she knew. It was crazy. I just didn't expect it at all, because I mean, I don't see myself as a book illustrator, you know.
Yeah,
and,
it's for your resume.
I was shocked, and I was really excited, because this came out, I drew this right after I'd spent a month up in Provincetown, or a few weeks in Provincetown at a writing residency, and I was so immersed in the book, and I just sketched it one day, and it was totally the three girls, and I just had it in my files, but I never really paid any attention to it, so it is now, yeah, it's pretty
Very
exciting.
cool.
It was really exciting.
Yeah, that's great.
But someone said it looks kind of Wes Anderson-ish,
Yeah.
which I didn't like that.
No.
Like in the way that you're sort of like, I mean, I'm not
that.
against men or anything, but I was like, no, I don't like that.
No.
No, we're not going with the Wes
No.
Anderson.
No.
Well, but, you
It's
know.
me. Very nice.
And what about the other two?
Alice.
Very
Well,
lush.
I had a different cover. Actually, Christine, I think you have like the original cover that I had, sort of a version of it.
Oh,
which was,
yeah.
An Alex
pretty.
Katz
Did you
painting.
know? That's pretty.
Wait, but how did that happen?
Did you want to?
Well, I mean, that's where I chose.
Oh.
The Alex Katz painting is slightly different color. They changed
Is that the
colors,
galley?
but-
Is it the galley?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I picked that painting. I really love that painting. This is just like an excerpt from the painting. But they thought it was too dark. And so they chose this This is actually a photograph that my editor took in the.
Oh, it's really pretty.
It's
I know, it is
beautiful.
really pretty,
Yeah.
and
They're both nice.
I
Yeah,
ended
that's
up
more
really,
valuable.
I
Yeah,
ended up
right.
being really happy with it. They originally had it with 2 Adirondack chairs with like the heads of the 2 older women, and I said,
No.
No.
Yeah. Right, too
I said, I
representative.
never in the book have them sitting outside talking. They're always walking, they're always moving, you know.
That's true, they're
I
not.
wanted to make a lot of, points about them being still, I mean, not that they're completely hale at 80, but they're not just sitting around in
Sitting
chairs
around.
talking,
Right.
So I got rid of the chairs thing.
Women in Adirondacks talking, I think the title also.
Mine, I do remember thinking like, oh, I hope they don't, because I was like, I wonder what the cover's gonna, because I know in the past, like, I get it, what do you think, and then maybe other ones, or, like, sort of that's how it goes. And I remember thinking, I hope they don't do a photograph, I don't know, and have a real person on it. Like, I just didn't want, yeah. And then this came, it was like, I hope you love this as much as I do, or my editor
They
said
always
something
say
like
They
that.
always say
Yeah, which
that.
I thought. Exactly.
Okay, note to self.
And then I thought, okay, and then I clicked the thing and it opened up and I laughed.
You did?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't have,
But is a photograph
good
the real
way.
person?
it is a photograph, but it's like weird enough, I don't know. And I am always in my life
I
been
love that
obsessed
cover.
with the like, those shadows on grass,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. And the weirdness of being up above, like the baby's about to get
By
snatched
by
by a
himself.
hawk or something,
So
yes.
where did that photo come from, do you know?
Oh, it's just like stock photo messed around.
It's good.
Okay.
I mean,
love
I
the
think it's
font,
just,
too.
it's all like graphically made up.
Someone took a picture of a baby on a blanket and put it on the grass, like Photoshop or something.
I think it's Photoshop, even the baby might have been put on a blanket.
Oh, okay.
Like the whole thing was created by Jenny
It's
Caro.
really,
Oh, that's
And then-
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. Then even the things looked like stars, kind of. I don't know, I thought, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
So you did,
And it seemed a little eerie,
Yeah.
even though.
it is, it's very eerie.
Yeah,
Because the baby's so
Just a
tiny.
baby alone
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere.
yeah.
It's very eye-catching.
Yeah.
Wait, I need to see it up close. You can't see that there's a baby, I just see a square. Oh, yeah, that is
Uh-huh.
a baby.
Yeah, it almost looks like a horror. I mean, not.
Well, yeah, somebody said,
So-
who said a hawk was about to come pick it up?
I did.
Oh, you did, yeah. That's the part that you haven't written yet, where the hawk comes down.
No.
You're in the baby's
But
mind.
things do get a little weird in the orchard. They do get a little.
It's true.
They do.
Yes.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
I wish we could say spoilers.
I know, me too, because I want to talk about that.
Me too.
Well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.